Hello, everyone. Uh, okay. Um, so, my topic is really a personal journey of mine, and I've titled it From Depression to Breakthrough. Leave the path of least resistance behind. In fact, yeet that thing out of the way and bet on yourself. So, let me start. Never in my life did I even imagine that the thought of jumping off Third Mainland Bridge would cross my mind, let alone entice me. But fortunately, one day it did. And from the outside, looking in on my life, everything was seemingly perfect. You know, by the grace of God, I had a privileged background. I had a prestigious law degree. I've gone to international studies for masters. I had a coveted role in one of the top firms in the country. I had somewhat supportive colleagues. I had a very loving boyfriend, now husband, and a budding fashion project on the side. But underneath all of this, on the inside, I was quite literally dying. So what people didn't know was that I had very crippling imposter syndrome and anxiety. I felt very undervalued, underestimated. Some would even say they used to manage me, because of a lot of familial connections, a lot of friendships, and that's not to say I was not doing good work, but it just felt like there was always a but. And quite honestly, the biggest truth of all is that I hated the job. But after many years of studying and practicing law, I came to the sad reality that I did not even have an idea of who I was again without the title of lawyer, barrister. And internally, I was utterly broken. So, however, this brokenness, the wonderful thing about it is that in this time, I learned some of the most important rules, lessons of my life, which so far. And I would be so honored to share some of these lessons with you. So, my very first lesson, you have to shut out outside noise and take stock of yourself. So for most of my life had followed a script. I went to the right school, tried to make the right grades, tried to meet the right friends. I did a respectable course, a course that honestly, if I'm really being honest, I chose it because I did not like math. A lot of people say that lawyers don't like math, and my husband would tell you that it's true. So, but somewhere along the line, I actually really lost. I became a version of myself that I did not even recognize again. So, back to my first lesson, I had to step back and just begin to ask myself, like, okay, so who are you? What makes you happy? What do you want to do? And I started taking, and as one would do, I started taking all these many personality tests, assessments, what career fits you, 16 personalities, name it, I tried it. Strength tests here and there. In fact, there was even one Red Bulls test on the kind of person, kind of adventurer you are. And I thought, okay, what the hell, why not? And honestly, it took me stripping back everything that I was to help me to begin to meet myself again. And slowly and slowly and surely, the real picture of myself actually began to emerge. I realized that underneath, the facade of this lawyer, barrister, the lawyer was tired. But inside, there was a young girl that would always be doodling designs in the middle of legal tense meetings. I'll be somewhere in the back just drawing. And my colleagues just used to look at me like, what's wrong with this one? But I had to come to that position, that realization that I had to be true to my authentic self. And having come to that position, I quickly learnt my second lesson. And my second lesson is that, see, nobody is going to come and save you. That's just the truth. And you have to plan and hope for the best, but you have to prepare for the worst. So once it became very clear to me that me and this job, we had to kiss ourselves bye-bye. I had to start to plan and say, okay, what do I need to do? And see, because all the bills were going to now be on me. So I had to try to see, okay, What do we need to do next? So I then realized that when you want to jump into something and actually being ready to jump into that thing, they're miles apart. So I had to begin to look at my finances and begin to plan. I started to save very, very aggressively. I started to invest intentionally. And I prepared for the worst. The worst at the time for me was I was going to go to fashion school, and I was going to be able to support myself with the money that I had saved and invested, expand or, dive more into the business and grow like that. But, and this is the thing about life and being in a place of transition, you might have wonderful plans, but life can throw you a curveball, which can be good or bad. So in my case, thankfully, I got offered a role to join a startup, a real estate investment firm, where I would be serving as a lawyer and someone that would be dealing with the regulatory side of real estate. Honestly, when I started telling people that, well, not many people, but when I started to tell my nearest and dearest that, this is where I was going to, they all looked at me like I was mad because I was leaving an institution that I think last year they turned, last week, I think they turned like 50 or 30 years. And I left it to start a startup that I was not even sure was going to be able to pay my salary. But then that really led me to my next lesson, which is you have to learn to bet on yourself. That is really the big thing about change, because if you're going to do something that is uncommon, you're going to do something that is novel, or you're going to do something that is just so outside your what you call normalcy, or what you call, some things that you're used to, you need to be a little bit mad and you need to bet on yourself. So the greatest turning point for me in my story so far was when I decided I was going to start my real estate brokerage. Oh, yes, okay. So, initially, I pitched this practice to the law firm that I was in. I was saying, okay, you know what, let us start this up as a department within the firm. Because I was like, you're such a big firm, you don't have this one department. That doesn't make sense to me. With this kind of caliber of clients, let's see what we can do. However, I soon quickly realized that to build this practice, one, I would not have any autonomy because I'll be building it with other lawyers and I'll be answerable to the partners of the firm. Number two, I would be leveraging my own personal network. And whatever new clients I get, it will belong to the firm because of the firm's non-compete clause. So basically, I would be working. I forgot the most important thing. See, that my salary will not really have changed. Maybe I would have been able to negotiate maybe 20%, 30% of any brief that I brought in. But that's about it. I would literally be working more intentionally and more intensely for someone building their own dream. So it really looked to me like, not really like an escape, but more like I just got a fancier chain. And I was at a loss. I began to speak to some people in my life, and I was warned. Let me tell you some of the things they said. They said, number one, that jeopardizing your future. Because prior to that, I was on a track to become a partner. And if some of you will know, that is like 10 to 15 to 20 years of intentional work, bringing clients, winning cases, closing transactions in record time, ranking many, many billable hours for a firm that may or may not promote you. So, a lot of people said, you are mad. You are reckless. You think because you have a safety net, you can just jeopardize your future. Why would you leave something that is so solid and is so stable for a salaried position that you don't even know that they are going to be able to pay your salary? But what people did not understand or did not get at the time was that my peace of mind had disappeared. I started to feel like I was losing myself. However, unknowingly and very randomly, I got a lot of support from my younger brother who was about to take the same step that I was taking. He left and he was working for like a unicorn. It was a big deal. He left them and he went to start up his own thing. And I realized there that I had to do this. And it's not because I felt like I was brave or I felt like, I could do it. No, I had to do it because I realized that survival requires a lot of courage. So as I began to count the cost, I started to speak to my closest family and friends, and I quickly learned my fourth lesson. You have to take constructive criticism on the chin, and you have to let it become fuel for what you're trying to do. Because, see, whether you do it, they will talk. If you don't do it, they will talk and you'll be talking to yourself that why did I not do this thing? You know? So I started to count the cost. I started to speak to, like I said, some of my closest family and friends, one of which involved my wonderful husband, who at the time, told me that I was nuts for thinking that I wanted to leave a stable job to go and to go and work with a startup or to start a startup. But I can thankfully and happily report that Baba is my biggest supporter now. Glory to God. People can change. But like I said, and that's just one, I said that, people were criticizing me, you know. But even in the midst of this, I had to speak to the one person in my life that is madder than me. And that is my maternal grandmother, who in her pre-retired life, she has started many ventures. So I went to speak to her, and this lady, she tore the idea to shreds. I was just clutching my pearls like, chat, let me go meet this woman. No. Waiting, I say, I go collect them. I'll just take it. And my grandmother, she does not spare you. However, speaking to her was the best thing I could have done because she critiqued the idea. She made me look at it up, down, and sideways. And it caused me to reconsider how I was going to make it work. But much more than anything, she gave me the push that I needed to hand in my resignation and begin to build what has now become the brokerage. Her input, for lack of any better words, was invaluable. And that's the real estate side. Even the fashion side, I spoke to my grandmother and we went through an overhaul, following my conversation with her. In fact, her and my mother, they became my biggest supporters. They would order stuff for me so that I could have capital. They introduced me to contacts who introduced me to the people that would become my first tailors, tailors sometimes, they have coins for him, but, at least I got my first set from them, and if, in fact, my friends, them too, they tried. One of my friends gave me the opportunity of my life to make her engagement dresses. And at the time, I didn't know what I was doing. So that was a wonderful learning curve for me. And really, I'm so thankful. But going through this phase led me to my biggest lesson of all, which is follow who no road. But I would like to add that who no road past the Almighty. So let me now blow your minds of what God's direction looked like. Number one, he gave me the name of the brokerage. I was sitting in my room one day and I just heard the name and I was like, okay, let's run with that. Number two, he introduced me to my first major client. In fact, how that one happened, I went downstairs to my father's sitting room and I just said hello, or I just said good afternoon to someone. And this person that I greeted, and I just, small chit chats, this person introduced me to my first major client who brought into my firm over 500 million naira in sales, and has become my mentor of sorts today, And even when we were getting through the process of setting up the office, setting up, the brokerage, speaking to people, I got substantial funding from unlikely sources. Talk about divine fuel. So, let me now say this. God is the only person that knows every eventuality, every consequence, every outcome. Whether you're going into a new field and you think, okay, I can research, I can network, I can do all these many things, I would implore you to ask for direction. That is something I do. I should do more of, to be honest. But I've done so in the past and I keep doing it. And I cannot tell you how many times that direction from God has been invaluable to my business. But lastly, so let's now see, where are we today? So, since changing and metamorphosing, my team, my fashion team, some of my members are here. Hi, guys. Okay. So, we've presented our debut collection at Lagos Fashion Week last year. We dressed a few notable people who, for NDA, we cannot really mention. We've dressed a number of brides on their special occasions, including not just their outfits, their parents, bridesmaids, and we've created lots of outfits for event management companies. And on the real estate side, which is the brokerage, we've brokered close to 2 billion naira worth of sales. We have managed complex regulatory issues, solved complex and knotty problems with regulators for clients, some of which we're still working today because we got repeat business from them. And lastly, we conduct a lot of due diligence for our clients. So, guys, this is what metamorphosing looks like in a nutshell. This is what it means to leave the path that you're used to and to move into the unknown that you may not really know so much about. And just in closing, I'd like to say this. To metamorphose is essentially to leave the path of least resistance and to forge into the new. And I must tell you, it is not pretty, it is not linear, and it is not instantaneous. However, it will demand from you quiet courage, a bit of madness, honestly. It's going to require you to honestly confront yourself and ask yourself, what do I really want to achieve in life? To plan well and to ensure that you plan, you prepare, you plan and hope for the best, you prepare for the worst, you take a leap and ask for God to catch you while you're midair. Thank you so much.